Human life is a journey marked by both soaring heights and profound valleys. We all experience moments of clarity and strength, but also moments of vulnerability, mistakes, doubts, and shadows. Saint Augustine, who knew the inner battle intimately, left us a sentence that resonates through the centuries. To fall is human, but to rise with God is divine. This is not merely a moral reflection, it is a portrait of the human heart in its pilgrimage toward grace. Augustine did not speak from an ivory tower, but from the sincerity of one who knew what it meant to fall again and again before encountering the light. This script explores what it means to fall, what it means to rise, and how that upward movement becomes divine when it is God who takes our hand. Falling is such a universal experience that it barely needs explanation. From our earliest childhood tumbles to the complex moral and spiritual failures of adulthood, falling is part of learning. But it is not merely personal, it is woven into the story of humanity itself. Saint Augustine understood this perfectly. Before his conversion, he lived in a restless search for pleasures, philosophies, and alternative paths. He did not hide this. In fact, he narrated it with brutal honesty in the Confessions. He recognized that his falls were not simply accidents, but choices, blindness, wounds left unattended. For Augustine, falling is part of our wounded nature. It is not an excuse, but it is a reality. We are creatures with a longing for the infinite, but we inhabit the finite. We seek the good, but often choose incorrectly. We yearn for eternity, yet stumble over the immediate. Falling, therefore, is not merely a moral failure. It is a reminder that we need help, that we are not self-sufficient. There is a danger greater than falling, choosing to remain fallen. When a person falls, guilt can paralyze, shame can immobilize, and despair can persuade the heart that rising is impossible. These emotions, though natural, can harden into spiritual chains. Augustine speaks of this tension when he describes his life before conversion. He knew he was far from truth, yet felt trapped by his own habits. He wanted to change but lacked the strength. In a famous passage, he admits he once prayed, "Lord, make me chaste, but not yet." This ironic confession reveals a very real drama. Wanting to rise, yet feeling unable. Many people today live that same interior struggle. Wanting to break a destructive cycle but feeling too weak. Wanting to be better but seeing themselves fail again. Wanting to start over but feeling the weight of their past. At this point, the human person encounters the limits of self-reliance. Willpower is not enough. Desire is not enough. Discipline is not enough. Rising alone is possible only to a point. The soul needs a strength that surpasses it. And this is where Augustine's phrase reaches its depth. To rise with God is divine. Rising is possible, but not solely through human effort. It requires the touch of the supernatural, the help of grace. Scripture is full of images of God drawing near to the fallen, not as a judge who scolds, but as a father who supports, a shepherd who seeks, a physician who heals. The Old and New Testaments echo this truth repeatedly. God is not scandalized by our falls. He approaches to lift us. Jesus embodies this with striking clarity. He bends down before the woman caught in adultery. He takes Jairus' daughter by the hand. He tells the paralytic to rise. He restores the widow's son. He forgives Peter after the denial. God's action is always to raise, not to reject. Augustine understood this deeply. For him, God does not merely forgive, he recreates. God does not simply help us stand, he transforms. He does not only restore, he divinizes. When Augustine says that rising with God is divine, he does not mean the person becomes a god. He means the human soul participates in God's grace. In the fall, we see human weakness. In the rising, we witness God's strength. To understand the phrase completely, we must consider Augustine's own journey. He fell many times into disordered passions, worldly ambitions, and philosophies that promised wisdom but offered no salvation. Yet what defined his life was not the depth of his falls, but the power of the grace that lifted him. The garden scene, when he heard the childlike voice saying, "Take and read," became the turning point. There, he realized that God did not require prior perfection, but openness of heart. His conversion was not a heroic act of will, but an act of surrender to grace. He summarized it beautifully. "You called, you shouted, and you broke through my deafness. It is God who moves first, God who heals, God who raises." Thus, Augustine could speak so boldly. He had lived both the fall and the rising. He knew the fall revealed his fragility, but the rising revealed God's mercy. Augustine's phrase is not abstract theology. It speaks deeply to daily life. It becomes real when someone forgives after being hurt, when a person breaks a destructive habit after years of struggle, when someone returns to prayer after a long spiritual dryness, when families regain harmony after conflict, when someone finds strength through faith to fight depression, guilt, or despair. Rising with God means letting grace work where we see only ruins. It means allowing God to turn wounds into sources of maturity, wisdom, and compassion. Augustine teaches that even our falls, when surrendered to God, become pathways to humility and intimacy with Him. The fall reveals who we are. The rise reveals who God is. Why, then, is rising with God divine? Because God does more than repair. He elevates. He does not restore us to the starting point. He lifts us to a new spiritual dimension. Because the strength involved is not purely human, but infused, a participation in God's own life. Because the heart is transformed, not merely corrected, but renewed. And because a soul lifted by God becomes a light for others, just as Augustine's life became a beacon for countless generations. The divinity of the rising lies in this hidden miracle, God working in the depths of the human soul. To fall is human, but to rise with God is divine. This sentence is a universal message of hope. It reminds us that falling is never the end, that God never tires of lifting us, and that no fall is so deep that grace cannot turn it into an ascent. Augustine, who knew darkness and then light, teaches us that the story of salvation is not the story of the perfect, but the story of the fallen who allow God to raise them. The fall humanizes. The rising divinizes. And between these two moments unfolds the greatest spiritual journey a soul can make.